Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Parshas Achrei Mot-Kedoshim, Tavshin Pei Aleph. I'd like to dedicate tonight's Drasha in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. In this week's parsha, Parak Yutes, Pasuk Yud Zayin, chapter 19, verse 17, the Torah states, Lo yisisna es achicha b'levavecha. Do not hate your brother in your heart. This is a prohibition against hating a fellow Jew. Now, tonight's talk is going to revolve around this mitzvah, this concept, and not to hate someone else, and to bring out really two very, very interesting aspects related to this mitzvah. So we're first going to start with a Gemara in Pesachim. The Talmud in Gemara Pesachim brings the following. Talmud says that there are certain people that God despises. And one of them is Haroya Devar Erva B'Chaveroi Umeyed Bo Yechidi. If it comes out, we know that if a person commits certain types of sins, that they are punishable when a rabbinical court had the power to punish, they would be punished for the sin that was committed. But in order to be able for a base and rabbinical court to be able to administer a punishment, you have to have witnesses, two of them. If one witness shows up, it's for no good purpose. Base can't do anything. And it really comes out that this one witness who came to testify is just speaking badly about someone else, just spreading bad information about someone, speaking lashon hara about someone, because you're coming to the Beis Din, you're telling them the person committed a certain sin, and Beis Din can't do anything anyway. So what's the point? So the Talmud says that a person who does that, a person who comes to Beis Din. Now here's the example the Talmud gives. The example is Haroya Devar Erva B'Chaveroi. A person saw someone else commit a sexual transgression. Umeyed Bo Yechidi, and he comes to testify in the rabbinical court alone by himself. He's the only one who saw the sin committed. There were no two witnesses there. And he came to the Beis Din and he told them what happened. Now, as I said before, if there would have been two witnesses at a point of time when a Beis Din had the power to administer punishments, there could have been a purpose of coming to testify. But he's only one witness. He can't do anything. And therefore, by just coming to Beis Din and basically publicizing to the Beis Din what kind of serious sin this person committed, Hashem hates a person, despises a person for doing that. Okay. Then the Talmud continues that although you're not permitted to go to the Beis Din if you saw such transgression, you're not permitted to go to the Beis Din and to testify. However, the Talmud says that you who have seen this person commit this kind of a sin. Now, one has to understand, we're talking about here a serious sexual transgression that everybody knows is forbidden, and you saw the person do it, and he did it intentionally, and he knows he's doing wrong, he knows the severity of the sin, he still committed it. That's the kind of person we're talking about. And you still can't go to the Beis Din and testify because there's no point. However, the Talmud says, Mutter lisan oisai. You who witnessed this person commit such a sin, you're permitted to despise him. You're permitted to hate him. Shenamar, as the pasuk states. Now, the proof comes from a very interesting source. And before we go through the source, we need to give a little introduction. And the introduction is that the Torah says if you see the fellow Jew's donkey that is squatting under its load, that means the load was not loaded properly and it's weighing too heavily on the animal, and because of that the animal has collapsed. The Torah says that you should help that person unload his donkey. And when the Torah tells us that mitzvah, the Torah says, Kisire chamor soinacha roivetz tachas vasai. When you see the donkey of your enemy squatting under its load, you should help him unload the animal. Now, the question is, what do you mean? What does it mean that this person is someone you can hate? The Talmud asks, The Gemara asks, Mishayla Misnei, are you allowed to hate a fellow Jew? Vaksiv, is it not written? You shall not hate your brother in your heart. That's this week's parasha. So what do you mean the donkey of your enemy, your Sainei, which means Sain Achrei? You would translate as your enemy, but literally means one who you may hate. Who may you hate? Ella, rather the case is the Ika Sahade de Aved Isura. I'm sorry. The case the Gemara comes out saying is, okay, so now the Gemara says, being that the Torah says your enemy, it seems to be something that's personal to you. Now, if we're talking about that there were actual witnesses about the sin that the person committed, and again, the witnesses are stating the person committed the sin intentionally, knowingly, well, if that's so, then he's not just your enemy, he's everybody's enemy. So there must be, the case is our case that we just said. You alone saw him commit this serious sin. Nobody else knows about it. No one else can believe you, but you know it. You are permitted to hate this person. You are permitted to dislike this person. Then the Gemara says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, the sage Rav bar Yitzchak said, mitzvah l'sanasai. It's a mitzvah to dislike him. Now, again, nobody else knows about it, and you don't even have a right to go around parading telling everybody about it. Maybe certain people you could tell, but generally you can just go around telling everybody about it. But you, for yourself, although typically for a fellow Jew, there's a prohibition against disliking a fellow Jew, disliking in the sense of, hating the person, there's a prohibition against that. But you who have seen a person commit that kind of a sin, you are permitted to dislike him. The Torah didn't tell you a Jew who has kind of acted out of the fold in that kind of manner, you're permitted, the Talmud says, to dislike him. And then it even says you have a mitzvah to dislike him. Okay, that's what the Talmud says. Now, right away, we can say to ourselves, okay, we can maybe understand this person has committed this kind of very grave sin. And again, it's intentional. We're talking about someone who understands exactly what they are doing. They understand that it's wrong. They understand the severity of it. They are a person who has observed Torah, not someone who is completely ignorant of Torah at all. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about someone who is a person who understands very, very well what they're doing, and they did it anyway. Okay, that person has committed that kind of a sin, has kind of taken them out of the fold to a certain degree, and therefore, it says, do not hate your brother. Well, your brother means somebody who's acting like your brother, not someone who's not acting like your brother. Okay, so it's interesting. All right, so you want to say, you're permitted to hate him. Why is it a mitzvah to hate him? What's the mitzvah? What's the nature of this mitzvah? That's something we have to explain. And then there is a very interesting discussion here in the commentary of Tosfos on this Gemara in Pesachim, where the Gemara says that when the Talmud source that you're allowed to hate this person is where the Torah talks about that you see the Torah talks about the donkey of your enemy that's squatting under its load. Okay, and we say there, why is he your enemy? Because you're allowed to hate him because you saw him do this sin. So Tosfos asks the following question that the Talmud in Gemara Baba Metzia says the following. You come on the road and you've got the following situation. There's a person, Oyev Lifreik. Now, let me back up a second. We spoke about a mitzvah about unloading even the donkey of your enemy. Even if it's the donkey of your enemy, you help him unload it. Now, what happens in general if, let's say, you come on the road and you have now there's also a mitzvah, that if, let's say, you come and you see that, there was this donkey that was laden with packages and it all fell off. And then you come by and you see this guy, this donkey driver, and all the packages have fallen off. You have a mitzvah to stop and help him reload. So there's a mitzvah to unload when it's weighing down on the animal too much and the animal has fallen under the load. And then there's also a mitzvah that when the packages fell off, to help them reload. Now, What happens if you find both at the same time? You have one person whose donkey needs to be unloaded, and then you have another person whose donkey needs to be loaded. Who goes first? Who do you do first? So the Gemara Metzia says, you unload the donkey first. Why? Because the donkey is suffering. So again, there's a mitzvah either way. But when it comes to unloading, there's also the aspect of the distress of the donkey by being weighed down by this load. And therefore, the mitzvah is first to help unload and then to load. Okay. But if the case is, let's say the person whose donkey needs to be unloaded is your friend. That's someone who you're supposed to love. And it's your enemy, it's your enemy's donkey. Again, the enemy, the person that you saw him commit this very grave sin, and you're permitted to hate him for it. His donkey needs to be loaded. Okay? Your friend, his donkey needs to be unloaded. Your enemy, the person you're about to dislike, needs to be loaded. Who goes first then? The Gemara says, mitzvah b'saynei. The mitzvah is to help load the person that you dislike. You to reload the donkey of the person you dislike, even though typically he wouldn't be first. Why? Because in order to combat your evil inclination. Now, if you look at the Gemara, you understand that to mean, well, what do you mean? To battle my evil inclination. Sounds like that's this person who I am disliking. I'm not supposed to dislike him. And therefore, the Torah says that even though typically we take into account the distress of the donkey, of the animal, well, if the situation is, that the reloading is for someone that you dislike, who you should do that first. Don't push him off. Do it. You should do him first. Why? To combat your Yetzer Hara, which is simply understood to mean this is a person that you dislike, but you shouldn't dislike him. So instead of giving in to your evil inclination, saying, I don't like him, I don't want to help him, you go and help him first, even though typically in this case you wouldn't be helping someone. But reload first before unloading. So Taisvis asks, but based on our Gemara now, if now the Gemara establishes that the person who you are hating in these verses is someone you're permitted to hate, then what is the combating Yetzer Hara? What am I combating? If I'm not allowed to hate him, okay, that's the Yetzer Hara I'm combating. But if I'm allowed to hate him, then what am I combating? Why would he go first? The Yesh Shleimar, and Taisa's answer is a very interesting answer. Kevan Shehu Sainai, being that you hate him, meaning he knows that you saw him. He knows that you dislike him for it, you hate him for it. Kevan Shehu Sainai, since he hates the sinner, Gam Chaveirai Sainai Isai, the sinner hates you. As it is written, Kamayim hapanim lapanim kemleiv ha'adam la'adam. Basically, people feel, when you dislike them, they feel it. The same way the water gives a reflection, your heart there's a reflection between what you feel and what that person senses. That person senses your dislike. And you know what happens then? He dislikes you. Okay. And because of this tension between them, then it comes to a sina gemura, an intense hatred, a complete hatred, literally translated. And for that applies the idea of combating the Yetzer Hara. So we're not talking about a person who you're not allowed to hate. You're allowed to hate him. The problem is, because you hate him, he hates you back. Those bad feelings can bring to sina gemura, to a complete hatred. That complete hatred, that's already Yetzer Hara, that's already Yetzer Hara turf. Because although you have a mitzvah to hate him, but it can't be a sina gemura, it can't be a complete and utter hatred. And therefore, to combat that utter hatred, we say that when you meet up with that person who you hate, and he doesn't like you either. And now, because of that, this somehow or another, the reciprocal hatred intensifies the hatred that's there. So combat that. Help him out, and help him out first. Help him out right away. Don't pass him up. Even though typically when it's a question of reloading or unloading, unloading goes first. Here, where it's a question of combating the Yetzer Hara of this intense hatred that can come about between the two of you, combat that by helping him right away. Okay, so now Taisus tells us that you're allowed to hate this person who you know has committed this very grave sin intentionally, but it can't come to a complete hatred. So what's that? What is an incomplete hatred? What's a complete hatred? So these are our two questions. What is the nature of this mitzvah to hate the person who has committed this grave sin, who you know has committed this grave sin? And then what exactly is this dislike that you may have, and the dislike that we say, oh no, it can't go that far. You can't let that go that far, and therefore help him out, even though typically you would be helping out someone to unload before reload. So the Be'er Yosef, in his commentary on this week's parsha and this whole discussion, so he suggests that the whole concept of hating this person who did the sin is really about making sure that you don't become influenced by what you saw him do. When we see people sin, and especially on that level, that has the potential to leave a bad mark on us, a bad influence on us. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says that terrible calamity comes to the world al Chilul Hashem, on desecrating Hashem's name. So the commentary by Tanura explains Chilul Hashem. One of his explanations are that, the explanation of Chilul Hashem, of desecrating God's name, is committing a sin publicly. And the severity of that is that either you did it publicly in a very brazen, open way, so we're very brazen about it, or by doing it public, people see and learn from your actions. It may not have been such a brazen act, but it was public. And because it was public, people saw it. And because people see it, people can learn from it. The idea of this is that you can know such something as a sin. But when you see someone actually perpetrate it, it brings it into the realm of reality for you. And once it's in the realm of reality for you, then already it's too close to you. It's too close to you. It's possible. It's a possibility by you. In some ways, it was just kind of theoretical. But now you actually witnessed it happen. It's entered the realm of reality for you. It means it's something that can happen. Something that can happen to you. And that actually can open up the possibilities in you to commit this sin. At some points, it's something distant. It's something completely beyond you. It's not beyond you anymore once you see it. And once it's not beyond you, you're closer to it, it's more possible for you to sin. There is a famous statement from the Gemara discussing a sota. A sota is a woman. The Torah talks about this in Parshas Nasa, a woman who has been warned by her husband not to go into seclusion with a certain man. She does it anyway. So now that creates a doubt upon her, a question upon her, has she committed adultery or not? The Torah talks about the process of how she is inspected, so to speak, to see if she did commit adultery. Torah tells us her husband brings her to the temple, and they take spring water. They write the portion of the Torah that talks about the sota into the water. She drinks the water. If she's guilty, she dies from that drinking of the water. Otherwise, she survives. Now, the Talmud says that if you see sota b'kolkula, that means you witnessed how a woman drank this water, and the Torah talks about when she drinks this water, she plotses. She blows up. She falls apart, literally. The Torah says that if you go ahead and you witness that, you now should vow to become a Nazir. A Nazir is a person who prohibits wine upon himself. And being that wine has the ability to bring to frivolous behavior and could bring to inappropriate behavior, like adultery. So being that wine can bring to adultery, and you just saw a woman who committed adultery, you now should start taking precautionary measures to stay away from things that could bring chas v'shalom to that kind of a sin. So the commentaries ask, why do you need the wine to stay away from wine for that? You just saw her plots. You just saw her blow up. You just saw a miraculous punishment for the fact that she committed adultery. So what more do you need to keep it away from you, to keep adultery away from you? The answer is, or at least some explain, that it's true. You saw punishment, but now you saw the reality of such a thing. Such a sin that could be just beyond you. Like, who could ever do such a thing? You saw it. You saw it's possible. Entered your realm of reality. You're closer to it. You need now to do something to counteract. What you saw, the punishment's not enough, because that's where you saw the sin. You now need something beyond that to prevent you from the negative influence, negative mark, seeing sin has now left upon you. So the Ber Yosef says that the nature of hating this person, and especially the idea of mitzvah to hate the person, is because that is how you counteract the effect of what seeing sin can have on you. You saw this person commit this terrible act. It became closer to you. So you know what you have to do to fight back that influence that it has on you? You have to hate the person who did such a thing. You have to despise that person. You have to say about that person, that's not someone I want to have anything to do with. And that counters a negative effect that his actions have left in you. So that's the nature of this hatred. Now, what does it mean? Okay, so I have a mitzvah to hate him, but as Tosfos says, I have to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. And if I can do something to make sure it doesn't come to sina gemura, a complete hatred, I have to do that. And what's that going to do? Help him out. Not just help him out when his donkey has fallen under its load, but even when it's a question of reloading his donkey before unloading the donkey of a person who you're supposed to love and you're supposed to like, we say to counter the effect, to counter the possibility of coming to a complete hatred, help him out first. That really is going to be an act of helping. And to combat the Yetzer Hara, not to allow the hatred between you to turn into a complete hatred. So the act that you're going to do is going to counter that. And we're going to focus on that soon. Well, what exactly is the nature of sina gemura, complete hatred? So I thought that perhaps it could have meant, and maybe this is an explanation, that it means that, when you dislike this person, if a person, let's say, has someone very close to them, a relative, who has committed a very serious act, very serious sin, and they knew what they were doing, it was very, very wrong for them to do, and you're very disappointed in them, and you actually really have negative feelings toward them for it. Maybe you're never going to have anything to do with them for it. Nonetheless, there's still a connection. It's your relative. There's still an emotional connection there. And you kind of really feel so bad that this has happened. You feel so bad this person has fallen so low. But there's still a connection there. Now, there are other people that we dislike for whatever reason. Either they did something to us or we're jealous of them, that we don't have any connection, emotional connection to them. We don't like them, and we just don't like them. We couldn't care less about them. So I was thinking that sina gemura means that we can, go from the state of where we dislike them for what they did, but we still feel for them at some level. And now, if there's tension between the two of you, it becomes a complete hatred. It means you have no feelings for him whatsoever. That's not acceptable. Perhaps that is an explanation. And then I saw another explanation from the commentary of the Machzis HaShekel in Shulchan Aruch in the Code of Jewish Law that says the sin of Gemura means that what this hatred can turn into is a hatred that you continue disliking him even after he did teshuvah. Meaning, we understand that there's a permission or a mitzvah to hate this person because of the sin that he committed. But let's say he does teshuvah. Let's say he repents. He seriously repents for what he did. Understandably, you can't dislike him anymore then. Problem is, though, that if now again there's this tension that comes between you, and that tension creates a greater animosity, then it's going to be possible that animosity will linger even after he does teshuvah. That's what we're trying to avoid. That's the Machzis HaShekel says. Very interesting explanation. But right now what we have is the nature of disliking this person is so that what he did doesn't leave, that the negative effect that is left by seeing the sin that he did should be countered by the fact that you reject this person for what he did. And that carries in itself a very important lesson that when we see people do things that are wrong, it leaves an impression upon us. That's something very, very, very important that we have to know. That seeing the wrong things, seeing people do the wrong things, it's true even we see them not in reality. You see them on a screen doing it. It leaves a bad impression. Although more so when we see them do it in real life. And it's not just sins as serious as we're talking about here. It could be things similar, or it could be any serious sin that a person were to do, and we see them do it. Maybe not, and it really depends on the level of the sin. Any sin can maybe leave an impression upon us. When it's done publicly, it can leave an impression upon all of us. What we see leaves an impression upon us. Depending on the situations, it can leave a greater impression or a lesser impression. But what we see leaves an impression upon us. And that's an important lesson to bear in mind. But the point of hating the person is so that you should counter the negative effect what you saw him do has on you. At the same time, don't let it get out of hand. And what do we do not to let it get out of hand? We're kind to them. And we're going to be kind to them even under circumstances where we would say, do something else first. Unloading the donkey typically goes before reloading a donkey. But if it means combating the hatred that can develop between you and the person you have a mitzvah to dislike, then do that first. Do that right away to make sure that you counter, that your act counters the natural tendency for a greater hatred to develop. So what that means is that if you want to counter dislike for someone, then, and so a piece of advice to deal with that is, be kind to them, be good to them. Invest of yourself in them. When you are acting good to them, when you are acting like a friend, then that will counter the negative feelings that you have towards a person. That's the nature of a person. What you give to, you develop a love for. So if you're trying to, you may have this person that you're permitted to dislike, but if you want to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand, then we say, be kind to him, help him more than you help him in a way that normally you wouldn't even be helping another person. Help him. And even if it's not this case, but it's someone that we dislike, someone may not have permission to dislike, but the way to counter that feelings, you want to know how to overcome those feelings. One very important way of overcoming those feelings is to help them. A person does something against you, and you bear, and you feel you're angry at them. You hold a grudge against them for doing it, which is not something we're permitted to do. How do you counter that? You counter that. One of the main ways of countering that is act kindly towards them. Act good to them. That will do a kindness to them. That will counter that will counter, and that will not just counter, that will actually take away those negative feelings so that you could actually love them and be friendly with them. So I heard a story many years ago, following story that illustrates this. Rabbi Shalom Salanter was one time, again, traveling on a train. And, in those days, people knew had heard of great rabbis, but they never saw them. So you could land up being on a train next to one of these great rabbis. You'd have no idea who he is. So according to the way the story goes, Yisrael Salanter was smoking. Smoking in those days was a very common thing that everybody did. And there was a young man sitting next to him who became very rude and impolite about the fact that he was smoking a cigarette in front of him. And he acted very disrespectfully for Yisrael Salanter, who he didn't know that's who he was talking to. He was basically, insulting a great rabbi, but he was insulting an older person than him. He acted very rude to him. And Yisrael Salanter put out the cigarette, okay? Now, very often, when these great rabbis would be coming to a city, there would be a large group of people waiting for them to come. When Yisrael Salanter got off the train, there were loads and loads, and hundreds of people there waiting to greet him. So the young man was trying to figure out, who are they coming for? And when he realized who they were coming for, he realized that he acted disrespectfully towards Yisrael Salanter. He felt terrible. And he went over to Yisrael Salanter and he begged him for forgiveness. Yisrael Salanter told him he forgives him. Then he started talking to the young man. He said to him, "Why are you here?" I think they were going to Vilna. He says, "Why did you come to Vilna?" He says, "Well, I want to become a sheikhet. I want to receive ordination to be able to do kosher slaughter on animals. So I came here to Vilna to get that ordination, to get that smicha." So Yisrael Salanter started speaking to him, and it didn't take him long to see that he was ignorant in the laws of shechita. He really didn't know what he was supposed to be doing. So Yisrael Salanter told him, actually arranged for someone to teach him the laws of shechita and how to perform shechita, and he received his ordination in shechita. So he went to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter afterwards, and he thanked him for his help, but he said, "Rebbe, why did you go out of your way to help me like this? I mean, you didn't even know who I was." Yisrael Salanter either explained it to him or to his students, whatever way the story goes. But he explained that he did this because although he had forgiven him for his actions, he was still fearful that he was going to bear a grudge. So in order to counter those feelings, he went out of his way to help him. Because if he helped him, then he knew that he would be getting rid of those bad feelings. That is the power of when we help another person. When we help another person, we actually are creating we're actually creating friendship with that person. We may not like them, but if we help them, we are actually creating the possibilities for liking him. Because what we invest in, that's what we love. What we invest in, we love. It doesn't mean we love them and therefore we invest, but rather by investing in them, by doing for them, that's what creates love. And therefore, if you have a dislike for a person and you want to get rid of those feelings, a very important way of doing that is help them, act towards them kindly, act with goodness to them. And when you are good to them, then you will feel good about them. That is what we see from this whole discussion. That when we have a person that we dislike, but we want to make sure, again, in the case that we discussed, you're permitted to dislike the person. We want to make sure it doesn't go beyond where it's supposed to go. What do? Help the person. If you help the person, then that will create friendship and love towards the person. And if there's a person in general that you don't like and you should be liking, and it's wrong for you to dislike them, even if they did something wrong to you, the Torah says you're not allowed to bear a grudge. A very important way to combat those negative feelings is help them, be kind to them, be good to them. And by doing that, you will now be creating the positive feelings towards that person. So that instead of disliking them, which was forbidden for us to do, we'll have the ability to love them, to like them. Because when we're good to someone, then we create good feelings towards them. Wonderful Shabbos.